Before Princess Diana became the people's princess, her own heart was shaped by a woman of quiet strength and profound kindness, her grandmother, Lady Cynthia Spencer. This is the story of the woman Diana simply called Granny, the often overlooked figure who provided the emotional blueprint for one of the most beloved icons of our time. Born into the twilight of Victorian England's aristocracy, Lady Cynthia's life was one of immense privilege, but also of deep personal tragedy and unwavering duty. As a confidant to a queen, she witnessed history from the monarchy's inner circle. As a grandmother, she became the crucial emotional anchor for young Diana, navigating a turbulent childhood. We'll explore how this gentle, resilient woman who endured the loss of a child and served the crown through a world war instilled the very compassion that would later define a princess and change the world. To truly understand Diana, we must first uncover the remarkable and nearly forgotten life of the woman who taught her how to care. To understand Lady Cynthia, we must first transport ourselves to a world that now feels as distant as a dream. She was born on the 16th of August, 1897. Queen Victoria, the grandmother of Europe, was still on the throne, a seemingly eternal symbol of the British Empire, upon which the sun never set. It was a world of rigid certainties, of unshakable class structures, and of immense, almost unimaginable privilege for the few who stood at its apex. Cynthia Eleanor Beatrix Hamilton was born directly into that apex. She wasn't merely an aristocrat. She was the daughter of James Hamilton, the third Duke of Abercorn. The Dukedom of Abercorn was one of the grandest in the peerage of Ireland, a title that carried with it vast swathes of land, immense political influence, and a lineage stretching back centuries. Her father was a formidable figure, a conservative politician, a close friend to the future King George V, and a leading unionist who championed the cause of keeping Ireland within the United Kingdom. He was the embodiment of the patriarchal, duty-bound aristocrat of his age, serious, respected, and commanding. Cynthia's mother was Lady Rosalind Cecilia Caroline Bingham, daughter of the Earl of Lucan. She brought her own impeccable bloodlines and a reputation for grace and social poise. Together, they presided over a world of almost feudal splendor. Cynthia's childhood was spent not in a house, but in a palace, Baronscourt, the family's sprawling ancestral seat in County Tyrone, Northern Ireland. Baronscourt wasn't just a home, it was a universe unto itself, a 35,000-acre estate of rolling hills, ancient woodlands, and serene lofts. Life there was governed by the rhythms of the seasons and the intricate rituals of the upper class. The day was structured around formal meals, outdoor pursuits like riding and shooting, and lessons in the schoolroom. For a young girl like Cynthia, the world outside this gilded cage was a distant abstraction. Her reality was one of countless rooms, a legion of servants attending to every need, and the constant unspoken understanding of her place in the world. Her education, like that of most aristocratic girls of her time, was not designed to foster a career or intellectual independence. It was designed to create a perfect duchess or countess. Governesses would have taught her French, the piano, watercolor painting, and literature. But paramount importance was placed on deportment, etiquette, and the complex art of household management. She was being trained not for a job, but for a destiny, to marry well, produce an heir, and flawlessly preside over another great house, just like the one she grew up in. It was a life of immense comfort, but also of immense constraint. A girl like Cynthia was not expected to have opinions on politics or society. She was expected to be a beautiful, dutiful, and silent pillar supporting the patriarchal structure of her class. Yet, To dismiss her upbringing as merely one of privilege is to miss the subtle forces that were shaping her character. The very concept of noblesse oblige, the duty of the nobility, was woven into the fabric of her existence. Her father, the Duke, was not just a landowner. He was a paternalistic figure, responsible for the well-being of the thousands of tenants who lived and worked on his land. Her mother, the Duchess, would have been deeply involved in local charities, visiting the sick and supporting the parish church. Cynthia would have witnessed this firsthand. From her earliest days, she would have understood that her title came not just with perks, but with profound responsibilities. It was a quiet, ingrained lesson in service and compassion that would define the rest of her life. This world of serene, ordered grandeur, however, was living on borrowed time. Beyond the manicured lawns of Barons Court, tectonic shifts were transforming society. The suffragette movement was gaining momentum, demanding a voice for women in a world run entirely by men. The rise of trade unions and the Labour Party was challenging the very foundations of the class system. And across the English Channel, the intricate web of European alliances was fraying, drawing the continent ever closer to a cataclysm that would shatter Cynthia's world forever. The guns of August 1914 were still a decade away, but the world she was born into, a world of deference, tradition, and seemingly permanent order, was already beginning to crumble, whether its inhabitants knew it or not. It was into this environment, this blend of immense privilege and looming change, that Cynthia grew from a girl into a young woman. By all accounts, she was not a boisterous or rebellious debutante. She was quiet, thoughtful, and possessed a gentle disposition that seemed almost at odds with the rigid formality of her surroundings. She was known for her kindness to the staff at Barons Court, a trait not always common among her peers. She had a deep love for reading and a sensitive, observant nature. As she came of age, the great machinery of the aristocratic marriage market began to turn. A suitable husband had to be found, someone of equal rank, wealth, and standing. Her name would have been whispered in the drawing rooms of London and the great country houses of England, and one name in particular stood out, the Spencers of Althorp. The Spencers were one of England's most storied families, with a history even older and more deeply embedded in the nation's fabric than the Hamiltons. They had been major figures since the Tudor period, accumulating vast wealth and political power. Their ancestral home, Althorp in Northamptonshire, was a treasure trove of art and history, a living museum to a dynasty's influence. The heir to all of this was Albert Edward John Spencer, known to his family and friends as Jack. Jack Spencer, Viscount Althorp, was handsome, charming, and the most eligible bachelor of his generation. Educated at Harrow and Cambridge, he was destined to inherit the earldom and take his place in the House of Lords. A match between the Duke of Abercorn's daughter and the future Earl Spencer was on paper perfect. It was a union not just of two people, but of two great houses, two vast estates, and two powerful political legacies. Their courtship was conducted according to the strict protocols of the era: chaperoned meetings, formal balls, weekends at country estates. It's difficult for us to know, a century later, the true depth of their personal connection amid such formality. Was it a passionate romance or a sensible, well-mannered arrangement? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. What is clear is that in Cynthia, Jack found a woman of grace, beauty, and the quiet strength required to be his countess. And in Jack, Cynthia found her destiny, the man with whom she would build a family and a life at the heart of another of Britain's great dynasties. Their engagement was announced and the wedding was set for the 26th of February 1919. The Great War, The cataclysm that had torn a generation apart and claimed the lives of so many of their contemporaries had finally ended just 3 months earlier. The world was bruised, battered, and irrevocably changed. A generation of young men, including many of Jack's friends, had been lost in the trenches. The old certainties were gone forever. Their wedding, held at St. James's Church, Piccadilly, was a symbol of hope and continuity in a world desperate for both. It was the union of two great families, determined to carry the torch of tradition into a new, uncertain future. As Lady Cynthia Hamilton walked down the aisle to become Viscountess Althorp, she was leaving behind the world of her childhood and stepping into the role she had been preparing for her entire life. She was now a Spencer. Her new home would be Althorp. Her duty would be to her husband, to his family, and to the heir she was now expected to produce. She was just 21 years old, a quiet, gentle soul standing on the precipice of a life that would see her navigate personal tragedy, world war, and intimate service to the crown, all while quietly laying the emotional foundation for the granddaughter who would one day change the monarchy forever. Her public life was just beginning, but the character that would define it, a character of kindness, resilience, and profound empathy, had already been forged in the privileged yet demanding world that was now fading into history. The wedding bells of 1919 marked not just the union of two people, but the merging of two great dynasties. For Lady Cynthia, the walk down the aisle was a walk across a threshold, leaving behind the world of her youth to embrace the destiny she had been prepared for her entire life. Now, as the new Viscountess Althorp and future Countess, she faced the immense reality of her new role: to become the mistress of a storied and demanding estate, to navigate a marriage of complex temperaments, and to fulfill the single greatest duty of all, securing the future of the Spencer line. For the 21-year-old Cynthia, now Viscountess Althorp, the wedding ceremony was not an end, but a beginning. It was the formal crossing of a threshold into a new life, a new identity, and a new domain. And what a domain it was! Althorp was not simply a house, it was a dynasty, cast in sandstone and brick, a magnificent vessel of English history. For nearly 400 years it had been the heart of the Spencer universe, and now its future rested partly on her slender shoulders. Imagine stepping into that world. The sheer scale of it would have been breathtaking even for a duke's daughter. 90 rooms filled with one of the finest private art collections in Europe. Portraits by Van Dyck, Reynolds, and Gainsborough stared down from the walls, their silent eyes a constant reminder of the lineage she had married into. A library holding thousands of priceless volumes stood as a monument to Spencer intellect and influence. Outside, thousands of acres of parkland, carefully sculpted by generations of landscape architects, rolled away to the horizon. This was her new home and her new responsibility. Her husband Jack, the Viscount Althorp, was a man steeped in this legacy. He was known as a world-class connoisseur of art, a man with an impeccable eye and a deep, almost scholarly knowledge of the treasures he was set to inherit. He was meticulous, ordered, and possessed a formidable intellect. But beneath the polished aristocratic veneer, Jack Spencer was also a man of complex and sometimes difficult temperament. He could be formal, emotionally reserved, and was known within the family for his sudden, sharp flashes of temper. He was, in many ways, the archetypal Edwardian patriarch, a man who expected duty, order, and deference. Into this dynamic stepped Cynthia, whose nature was one of gentle calm and quiet empathy. Where Jack was exacting, she was accommodating. Where he was prone to storms, she was the quiet harbor. Their marriage was a classic study in contrasts, yet It was this very dynamic that allowed it to function. Cynthia's role was not to challenge her husband, but to complement him, to soften the hard edges of his personality, and to be the gracious, diplomatic heart of their home. She quickly became an exemplary hostess, presiding over the endless cycle of weekend shooting parties, formal dinners, and social gatherings that were the lifeblood of their class. But her most important duty, the one that overshadowed all others, was clear and unspoken. She had to produce an heir. For the great aristocratic houses of Britain, succession was everything. A title and an estate needed a direct male line to continue. The pressure on a new bride, particularly the wife of an heir, was immense. The entire future of the Spencer dynasty, of Althorp itself, depended on her. In 1920, to the delight of the family, Cynthia gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Anne. A year later, a second daughter, Sarah, followed. While cherished, the births of two girls only intensified the silent pressure. The estate, the titles, the legacy, all of it was entailed to pass to a son. Then in 1922, Jack's father, the 6th Earl Spencer, passed away. At the age of 30, Jack inherited the title, becoming the 7th Earl Spencer, and Cynthia, at just 25, became the Countess Spencer, the chatelaine of Althorp. Her status was elevated, but so was the weight of expectation. The couple spent considerable time at Spencer House, their magnificent London residence, but Althorp remained the center of their world. It was there, on the 14th of January 1924, that the moment the family had been waiting for seemed to arrive. Cynthia gave birth to a son, John. The succession was secure. An heir was born. But the celebration was tragically, cruelly short-lived. This is one of the quiet, untold tragedies of Cynthia's life, a moment of profound personal grief that is often lost in the grand sweep of history. The infant John was incredibly weak. He survived for only a few hours before his fragile life slipped away. We can only imagine the devastation, to have fulfilled the ultimate duty, only to have it snatched away in a moment. For any mother, the loss of a child is an unbearable sorrow. For Cynthia, it was a grief compounded by the immense weight of dynastic failure. In the formal, emotionally restrained world of the aristocracy, there would have been little room for public mourning. A stiff upper lip was expected, but behind closed doors, the pain must have been immense. It is in moments like these that the true measure of a person's character is revealed. Cynthia, supported by her husband, endured this heartbreak with a quiet resilience that would become her hallmark. And then, a testament to her fortitude and hope, just under a year later, on the 12th of May, 1924, she gave birth to another son. They named him Edward John, but he would be known as Johnny. This was the boy who would survive. This was the boy who would become the 8th Earl Spencer, and who would one day become the father of a girl named Diana. The birth of Johnny was not just a joy, it was a profound relief, a rainbow after a devastating storm. The succession was, at last, truly secure. With her family growing, Cynthia settled into her role as countess and mother. She was, by all accounts, a devoted and loving presence in her children's lives. While the day-to-day care was, as was standard for the time, largely handled by nannies, Cynthia ensured she was not a distant, formal figure. She created an atmosphere of warmth and stability, an emotional anchor in a household run with military precision by her husband. But while life within Althorp's walls found a new equilibrium, the world outside was in turmoil. The Roaring Twenties gave way to the Great Depression of the 1930s. For the first time, the great landed families of Britain felt a genuine financial threat. Death duties, rising taxes, and the falling income from agricultural land meant that maintaining colossal estates like Althorp became a monumental struggle. Many aristocratic families were forced to sell off land, art, or even their homes. Lord and Lady Spencer were not immune. They had to make difficult decisions, carefully managing their resources to preserve the estate for future generations. This period would have instilled in Cynthia a deep understanding of the precariousness of their world, a sense of duty that was not just about social grace, but about sheer survival. It was against this backdrop of personal resilience and societal change that Cynthia's life took another unexpected turn. In 1936, the monarchy was thrown into its greatest crisis of the 20th century. King Edward VIII abdicated the throne to marry the American divorcee Wallis Simpson. His shy, stammering younger brother was thrust onto the throne as King George VI. His wife, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, a fellow aristocrat whom Cynthia knew well, became his queen. The new king and queen needed to surround themselves with people they could trust implicitly, people of unimpeachable character, loyalty, and discretion. And when Queen Elizabeth was assembling her new household, one of the first people she turned to was her friend, Cynthia Spencer. In 1937, Cynthia was appointed as one of the Queen's Ladies of the Bedchamber. This was no mere honorary position. A Lady of the Bedchamber was a member of the Queen's innermost circle. She was a companion, an assistant, and a confidant. The role required her to be in regular attendance, accompanying the Queen on public engagements, helping with her voluminous correspondence, and providing quiet personal support away from the public eye. The appointment was a profound statement about Cynthia's character. In a world of gossip and intrigue, she was known to be utterly trustworthy, serene, and dependable. She was the calm in any storm, a quality the new queen, facing the immense pressure of her unexpected role, valued above all else. Cynthia now had to balance her duties at Althorp with her service to the queen. Her life became a delicate dance between her family and the crown. And just as she settled into this new role, the world plunged into darkness. In September 1939, Britain was at war with Nazi Germany. The Second World War was the defining test for her generation, and Cynthia was positioned to witness it from the very epicenter of national resistance. The King and Queen famously refused to leave London, even during the height of the Blitz, as a symbol of solidarity with their people. And as her Lady of the Bedchamber, Cynthia was often there with them, sharing the risks. Imagine the scenes she must have witnessed. The gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, once the stage for glittering state balls, now stripped of their chandeliers and taped against bomb blasts. She would have been present on the 13th of September 1940, when the palace itself was hit by German bombs while the King and Queen were in residence. Queen Elizabeth famously remarked, "I am glad we have been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." Cynthia was the first-hand witness to that raw courage, that unwavering sense of duty that so inspired the nation. Her role was to provide a sense of normalcy and calm amidst the chaos. She would have helped the Queen prepare for her morale-boosting visits to bombed-out neighborhoods, hospitals, and factories. She would have sat with her in the cold, Spartan rooms of Windsor Castle, where the royal family spent many nights for safety. Through it all, she was a source of steadfast, quiet support. She never spoke publicly of her experiences. Her discretion was absolute. But her service during these years forged an unbreakable bond of friendship and trust with the Queen. She saw history not from a distance, but from the inside, witnessing the immense personal strain and the extraordinary public courage of the monarchy at its finest hour. When the war finally ended in 1945, Britain was victorious but exhausted and bankrupt. The world had changed once again. The post-war era brought a labor government to power, the creation of the National Health Service, and the beginning of the end of the British Empire. The old aristocratic order that Cynthia had been born into was fading faster than ever. Yet her own sense of duty remained unwavering. She continued her service to the Queen, a constant, reassuring presence as the country navigated the difficult years of austerity and recovery. And as the nation looked towards a brighter future, so did the Spencers. Her children were growing up. Her son Johnny was now a young man, beginning his own military career before preparing to take over the running of Althorp. And soon he would marry and have children of his own. Cynthia, the young bride who had entered Althorp with the weight of succession on her shoulders, the countess who had weathered personal tragedy and a world war, was about to step into the role that would, for a future princess, define her legacy, the role of a grandmother. A new generation of Spencers was on the horizon, and with it, a baby girl who would inherit her grandmother's quiet empathy and carry it out into the world on a scale Cynthia could never have imagined. Duty, resilience, and steadfast service to the crown had become the defining pillars of Cynthia Spencer's public life. She had proven herself as a capable countess, a mother who endured heartbreak with grace, and a trusted confidant to royalty during the nation's darkest hour. But as the post-war world settled into a new, uncertain peace and her own children began families of their own, she was about to step into the role that would become her most personal and arguably her most enduring legacy, a role defined not by protocol or position, but by the profound and quiet love she would offer a new generation. Duty, resilience, and service to the crown had been the defining pillars of Cynthia Spencer's life. She had navigated the rigid expectations of the aristocracy, the private heartbreak of losing a child, and the national terror of a world war, all with a quiet, unshakable grace. But as the post-war world settled into a new, uncertain peace, Cynthia was about to step into the role that would become her most enduring and perhaps most important legacy. It was a role that came with no title or formal investiture, but one that required the very deepest reserves of her character, the role of a grandmother. The story of this new chapter begins, as it so often does, with a wedding. On the 1st of June, 1954, Cynthia's beloved son and heir, Johnny, the 29-year-old Viscount Althorp, married the Honorable Frances Roche at Westminster Abbey. It was the society wedding of the year. The bride was beautiful, the groom handsome, and in attendance was Her Majesty the Queen Mother, and a host of senior royals. It was a spectacular display of dynastic continuity, a picture-perfect moment of hope for the future of the Spencer line. For Cynthia and her husband Jack, it must have been a day of immense pride. The young couple began their life together at Park House, a large but comfortable home on the Queen's Sandringham estate in Norfolk. Soon, the next generation of Spencers began to arrive. A daughter, Sarah, was born in 1955, followed by Jane in 1957. Then, a familiar tragedy echoed through the family. In January 1960, a son, John, was born, but like his uncle a generation before, he was born with severe health complications and died within 10 hours. For Johnny and Frances, the grief was overwhelming, and for Cynthia, it must have been a painful revisiting of her own devastating loss. But once again, hope followed sorrow. On the 1st of July, 1961, Frances gave birth to another daughter. They named her Diana Frances. This was the child who would live, who would grow up, and who would carry the Spencer name onto the world stage in a way no one could have possibly foreseen. A final child, A son named Charles would complete the family in 1964. From their grand home at Althorp, Cynthia and Jack watched their family grow. For the young Spencer children, trips to see their grandparents were like stepping into a fairy tale. Althorp was a magical kingdom of endless corridors, secret gardens, and fascinating treasures. But the true magic of Althorp was not in its grandeur. It was in the presence of their grandmother. Granny Cynthia, as Diana and her siblings called her, was the heart of this enchanted world. As the years went by, it became tragically clear that the picture-perfect wedding of Johnny and Frances had masked a deeply troubled marriage. The relationship was volatile and unhappy, a clash of two strong personalities that often descended into bitter, painful arguments. The atmosphere at Park House grew increasingly tense and emotionally fraught. For the children caught in the crossfire, it was a confusing and frightening environment. And it was in this context that their grandmother's home and her presence became more than just a place for a weekend visit. It became a sanctuary, a refuge. Althorp was the calm to Park House's storm. When the children were there, the world seemed to slow down. The shouting was replaced by the quiet rustle of pages turning in the library, the tension replaced by the simple, comforting rituals of country life. And at the center of it all was Cynthia. Unlike her husband, the Earl, who could be a somewhat remote and formidable figure to the young children, Cynthia possessed an innate ability to connect with them on their own level. Those who knew her said she had a special gift for making a child feel seen and heard. Princess Diana herself would later recall these moments with a deep and wistful affection. She spoke of her grandmother's soft voice as she read stories for hours, her gentle hands, and her warm, all-encompassing hugs. In a world that was becoming increasingly unstable, Granny Cynthia's love was a constant. It was simple, unconditional, and utterly dependable. Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, has spoken of his grandmother's innate kindness and quiet goodness. He described how she exuded a palpable sense of calm and decency. For a sensitive and emotionally intuitive child like Diana, this was a lifeline. She was a little girl who felt things deeply, and in her grandmother, she found a kindred spirit, someone who understood the language of the heart, a language that was often lost in the turmoil of her own home. The defining crisis of Diana's childhood came in 1967, when her mother Frances left her father for another man. The separation was followed by a brutal and highly public divorce and custody battle in 1969. For Diana, then just a young girl, the departure of her mother was a profound trauma, an emotional wound that would shape the rest of her life. She felt a deep sense of abandonment, a feeling that she was somehow unlovable. It was during this period of immense upheaval that Cynthia's role as an emotional anchor became absolutely vital. While the children remained with their father, it was their grandmother who stepped in to provide the consistent, nurturing maternal presence they so desperately needed. She didn't replace their mother, but she offered a port in the storm, a safe place where Diana and her siblings could feel secure and cherished. The seeds of the people's princess, the woman who would become world famous for her empathy and her connection to the suffering, were being sown right here in the quiet comfort of her grandmother's love. She was learning firsthand the healing power of simple human kindness in the face of deep pain. But who was Cynthia behind the warm, grandmotherly exterior? Her personal story was one of remarkable consistency. Her marriage to Jack, the 7th Earl, remained a study in contrasts. He was the connoisseur, the collector, the sometimes irascible patriarch, focused on the preservation of the estate. She was the quiet diplomat, the family's emotional core, the one who smoothed over difficulties with her gentle touch. Her calming influence was, by many accounts, the essential ingredient that held the often fractious Spencer clan together. Her service to the crown also continued to be a cornerstone of her life. A particularly poignant moment came in February 1952 with the sudden death of King George VI. Queen Elizabeth, her friend and the monarch she had served so devotedly, was now the Queen Mother. In the lonely, bewildering days and months of widowhood, Cynthia was a steadfast companion. Her own experience with grief, her discretion, and her unwavering loyalty made her an invaluable source of comfort and support. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, the delicate balance between personal sorrow and public duty. This deep, lifelong friendship with the Queen Mother was a testament to her character, a character built on loyalty, empathy, and a profound sense of service. These two roles, confidant to a queen and beloved grandmother to a future princess, were not separate, but deeply intertwined. The same qualities that made her an exemplary lady of the bedchamber were the ones that made her a perfect grandmother. Her discretion, her patience, her ability to listen without judgment, and her innate kindness were universal. She taught her grandchildren, especially Diana, by example, rather than by lecture. They saw her treat the staff at Althorp with the same respect and warmth she afforded her royal friends. They witnessed her quiet dedication to her duties. They felt her unwavering love. It's here, in these quiet, unrecorded moments, that we find the emotional heart of our story. Imagine a young Diana feeling lost and alone after her mother's departure, arriving at Althorp. Imagine the feeling of relief as she stepped out of the car and saw her grandmother waiting for her, her smile a promise of safety and love. Imagine them walking through the gardens, Cynthia perhaps pointing out her favorite roses, her calm presence a balm to the little girl's wounded spirit. These weren't grand gestures. They were the small, consistent acts of love that build a fortress around a child's heart. This was the gift Cynthia Spencer gave to her granddaughter. She didn't just give her happy memories, she gave her a blueprint for compassion. She showed her what it looked like to care for others, to be a source of strength in times of trouble, and to lead with the heart. Long before Diana would ever shake the hand of an AIDS patient or walk through a field of landmines, she learned the fundamental power of human connection from the quiet, graceful woman she called Granny. The public icon was yet to be born, but the empathetic, caring woman was being carefully, lovingly nurtured in the heart of the English countryside. This warm and cherished portrait, drawn from the heartfelt memories of a loving family, reveals the undeniable emotional core of Cynthia's story. But history, if it is to be understood honestly, can never be a simple portrait. To truly appreciate the life of Lady Cynthia Spencer and the world she inhabited, we must be willing to step back from the comfort of these personal truths. We must look beyond the cherished memories to ask more difficult questions and explore the complex, sometimes challenging, debates that lie within the shadows of her quiet and graceful life. We have painted a portrait of a woman defined by kindness, a beloved grandmother whose gentle spirit provided a sanctuary for a future princess. This picture, drawn from the cherished memories of her family, is true and powerful. But history, if it is to be understood honestly, cannot be a simple portrait. It must be a landscape, complete with shadows, complex terrain, and questions that resist easy answers. To truly appreciate the life of Lady Cynthia Spencer, we must step back from the warmth of the hearth and view her through the more critical and often less comfortable lens of historical inquiry. Her life was, by any public measure, unimpeachable. There were no scandals, no missteps, no public controversies, But the absence of controversy does not mean an absence of complexity. The debates surrounding Cynthia's life are not about her actions, but about the very framework she existed within. They concern the nature of her influence, the silent choices she made, and the system she so gracefully represented. The first area of nuanced debate lies at the very heart of her home, her marriage to Jack, the 7th Earl Spencer. We've described her as the calming influence on a difficult and sometimes irascible husband. And while this is true, a modern perspective invites a more challenging question. Was her quiet, accommodating nature a source of profound strength that tempered his excesses? Or was it a form of passive acceptance that enabled a rigid, patriarchal, and emotionally challenging environment to persist? Jack Spencer was, by all accounts, a man of his time and class, but even by those standards, he could be extraordinarily demanding. He was a fervent believer in order, routine, and discipline. His temper was legendary within the family. His own children, including Diana's father Johnny, were known to be intimidated by him. He ran Althorp with the precision of a military campaign, and his emotional world was often just as regimented. He was not a cruel man, but he was a deeply formal and often emotionally inaccessible one. Within this dynamic, Cynthia was the universal peacemaker. Her role was to soothe her husband's temper, to manage his moods, and to create a buffer between him and the rest of the family. From one perspective, this was an act of immense strength and emotional intelligence. She kept the family unit intact and provided the warmth that her husband could not. She created a space for affection to exist in a household that might otherwise have been emotionally barren. Her gentle diplomacy was not weakness, but a powerful, if subtle, form of domestic leadership. However, a different interpretation might argue that this role, while making life more pleasant, did little to challenge the underlying patriarchal structure. By constantly accommodating, did she inadvertently reinforce the idea that the man's temperament was a force of nature to be managed rather than a behavior to be questioned? It's a debate that highlights the limited choices available to women of her generation, even those of the highest rank. Open defiance was unthinkable. Her strategy of quiet management was likely the only one available to her, a pragmatic choice aimed at creating the most harmonious life possible within an unchangeable reality. Her quietness was her power, but it was a power exercised entirely within the strict confines of the world she inherited. This leads to a second broader debate, the very nature of aristocratic parenting in her era. We have celebrated her as a warm and loving grandmother to Diana, but we must also place her within the context of a system that, by today's standards, was built on emotional distance. The world of the British upper class ran on the engine of nannies, governesses, and eventually boarding schools. Parents, particularly fathers, were often remote figures. Mothers were expected to oversee the nursery, but the day-to-day hands-on care, the feeding, the bathing, the comforting of a crying child at night, was the domain of paid staff. Cynthia was undoubtedly a more involved and affectionate mother and grandmother than many of her peers. The very fact that Diana's memories of her are so vivid and warm is a testament to the effort Cynthia made to bridge that institutional gap. But she was still a product of that system. The question, therefore, is not whether she loved her children and grandchildren, that seems beyond doubt, but rather how we interpret that love through the filter of time. Was her warmth a rebellion against the coldness of her class, or was it simply the kindest possible expression of a fundamentally detached way of life? This is not a criticism of her personally, but an examination of the cultural water she swam in. The stiff upper lip was not just a cliche, it was a core tenet of their world, a belief that emotional restraint was a virtue. Cynthia's great gift was her ability to project profound kindness and empathy through that veil of restraint. Yet the system she was part of is the very one that has since been criticized for creating generations of emotionally buttoned-up leaders and family members. She was perhaps the most humane face of an often inhumane system of child-rearing. Beyond the family, there is the debate over her public role, or rather, her lack of one. Cynthia Spencer lived through some of the most turbulent decades in modern history. She was born when women could not vote and died in the era of second-wave feminism. She saw the zenith of imperial power and its rapid post-war dissolution. She witnessed the birth of the welfare state, which fundamentally challenged the aristocratic principle of paternalistic charity. Yet, there is no record of her ever taking a public stance on any political or social issue. Her life was one of determined and absolute political silence. Was this an abdication of the responsibility that came with her immense privilege? Some of her contemporaries, women like the politically active Nancy Astor, the first woman to take her seat in Parliament, used their position to forge a public voice. Cynthia chose a different path. Her influence was exercised entirely behind the scenes, in her service to the Queen, in her support of local charities, and within her own family. One could argue that in a century of violent, noisy ideologies, her commitment to quiet decency, personal kindness, and steadfast duty was its own form of powerful, if apolitical, statement. She may have believed that her role was not to change the world through speeches, but to improve her small corner of it through her personal conduct. This interpretation sees her not as passive, but as someone who understood her strengths and chose a different, more private sphere of influence. Her life's work was the cultivation of character, her own and that of those around her. The debate remains: was this a noble choice or a missed opportunity? Finally, we are left with the most poignant and speculative debate of all, the one that exists in the shadow of what might have been. Lady Cynthia Spencer died of a brain tumor in 1972. She was 74 years old. Her death was a deep personal loss for her family and for the Queen Mother, but its greatest historical significance lies in its timing. Her granddaughter, Diana, was just 11 years old. The beloved Granny Cynthia was taken from her life just before the most turbulent years of her adolescence, and nearly a decade before she would be thrust onto the global stage. And so, we must ask the question, what if she had lived? What if that steady, wise, and unconditionally loving presence had been there for Diana during her courtship with the Prince of Wales? What if she had been there to offer advice on navigating the labyrinthine protocols and immense pressures of the royal family, a world Cynthia knew intimately from her years of service? Would her grandmother's guidance have helped Diana feel less isolated? Could Cynthia, with her deep friendship with the Queen Mother, have acted as a bridge, a trusted mediator between the bewildered young princess and the rigid institution she had married into? Could her wisdom have helped Diana to better understand the demands of royal duty while also validating her own emotional instincts? We can never know, but the debate over the impact of her absence is profound. Many have argued that the loss of her grandmother left an emotional void in Diana that she spent the rest of her life trying to fill. Perhaps the calming, grounding influence of Cynthia Spencer was the one thing that could have helped her navigate the turbulent waters of her royal life. Her death was not just the end of a life, it was the removal of a crucial support system, a guiding star, just when it would be needed most. Her absence, in this sense, is as much a part of Diana's story as her presence once was. These questions do not diminish the memory of Lady Cynthia. They enrich it. They force us to see her not as a one-dimensional saint, but as a complex woman living through a complex time. She was a product of a rigid and fading world, yet she embodied timeless virtues of kindness and empathy. She was a silent participant in history, yet her personal influence would shape one of its most vocal figures. Understanding these tensions is the key to understanding her true and deeply significant place in the story. In the autumn of 1972, the gentle, steady light that had illuminated the Spencer family for over 5 decades began to dim. Lady Cynthia Spencer, after a life of quiet service and profound personal influence, passed away at the age of 74. Her death, following a battle with a brain tumor, did not make international headlines. It was a private sorrow, mourned deeply by her family, her friends, and by a queen mother who had lost one of her most trusted and steadfast companions. The world at large, busy with the noisy events of the day, took little notice. But for those who had known her love, especially her grandchildren, it was the end of an era. An anchor had been lifted, and the ship in many ways was set adrift. The immediate aftermath of her death was felt most acutely at Althorp, and within the fractured family she had worked so hard to hold together. For her husband, Jack, it was the loss of his partner of 53 years, the quiet counterpoint to his own demanding nature. For her children, it was the loss of their unwavering advocate and emotional core. But for 11-year-old Diana, the loss of her granny Cynthia was a seismic event. It was her first profound experience with the permanence of grief, and it came at the most vulnerable of times. The sanctuary of Althorp would never feel the same. The one person who had offered a constant, unconditional, and calming love was gone. This loss compounded the existing wounds of her parents' divorce, leaving a deeper void, a greater sense of insecurity in its wake. History is a story of ripples. The impact of a single life does not end at the grave. It radiates outward, often in unseen ways, touching shores and shaping events that the person themselves could never have imagined. And so it is with Lady Cynthia Spencer. Her true historical aftermath, her lasting significance, is not found in the obituaries of 1972, but in the extraordinary life of the granddaughter she so lovingly nurtured. Cynthia's legacy is inextricably woven into the legacy of Princess Diana. When we look at the qualities that made Diana the people's princess, we are, in many ways, seeing the values of Cynthia Spencer amplified on a global stage. Where did Diana's famous empathy come from? It came in part from the grandmother who showed her what it meant to be truly seen and heard. Where did her ability to connect with anyone, regardless of their rank or station, originate? It was modeled in part by the Countess, who treated her staff with the same quiet dignity she afforded the Queen. Where did Diana find the courage to lead with her heart in an institution that often prioritized protocol over people? She was drawing from the well of unconditional love, first established by Granny Cynthia. Cynthia provided the emotional blueprint. Her life was the quiet text from which Diana learned her most important lessons. While she did not live to see the princess, she helped create the woman. Diana took the private virtues of her grandmother, kindness, compassion, service, and translated them into a revolutionary public language. Cynthia's influence was the steady, unseen current beneath the spectacular wave of Diana's life. Beyond this profound personal influence, Lady Cynthia's story has a broader significance. It serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of soft power, the influence that comes not from command and control, but from character, integrity, and personal connection. In a world that often measures greatness in terms of wealth, power, and fame, Cynthia's life champions a different set of metrics: loyalty, discretion, and quiet dedication. Her decades of service to the Queen Mother were a masterclass in this. She was a crucial support figure to the monarchy during some of its most trying times, not through political maneuvering, but through the simple human act of being a reliable and compassionate friend. She helped to humanize the institution from within. What can we learn from her story today? Perhaps the most important lesson is to look for the quiet figures in our own histories. We are drawn to the dramatic, the loud, and the controversial, but so often the real foundations of our world are laid by people like Cynthia Spencer. They are the steady hands, the quiet hearts, the unsung heroes who do the essential work of holding families, communities, and even nations together, not for praise or recognition, but because they believe it is the right thing to do. Her life encourages us to value substance over style, integrity over celebrity, and the quiet work of building character over the loud pursuit of fame. She remains relevant today as a symbol of a particular kind of strength, a strength that is gentle, resilient, and rooted in empathy. In our own fractured and noisy era, her example of quiet dignity, unwavering loyalty, and profound human kindness feels more necessary and more radical than ever. She represents a form of grace that we rarely see but instantly recognize as something precious and essential. She was the forgotten grandmother whose love shaped a princess, and in doing so, created ripples of compassion that continue to spread across the world, carried forward today in the work and character of her grandsons, Prince William and Prince Harry. In the grand tapestry of history, some threads are woven with gold, destined to catch the light and dazzle the eye. Others are woven with simpler, quieter fibers, their purpose not to shine, but to provide the strength and integrity that holds the entire design together. Lady Cynthia Spencer was one such thread. Hers was not a life lived in the glare of the spotlight, but in the steady, gentle glow of quiet influence. She was the product of a lost world, an aristocrat of the old school. Yet she embodied timeless virtues of compassion and empathy that resonate to this day. She was the confidant to a queen, the anchor of a great family, and the beloved grandmother who provided the emotional foundation for a princess who would change the world. Her story is a profound and moving testament to the fact that the most powerful legacies are often not built in public, but are quietly forged in the human heart. She reminds us that true strength is not always loud, that true grace needs no audience, and that a life dedicated to quiet kindness can, in the end, echo louder than any king's decree. She was the whisper that became a roar, the forgotten root of a spectacular and unforgettable English rose,